Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Cole. I've been a member here probably for 25 years. I've been here less often recently than I'd like to have been, but it's nice to be back and to see you all. Thanks for coming out. I am going to be giving a talk about following the rules. Judaism is kind of unique as religions go. Well, maybe not unique, but I should say that it's unique. It's not unique, but Judaism is about following the rules. We separate out what kind of Jew we are from how many rules we follow, essentially. And I am professionally a musician and a music teacher, so I live in a very non-Jewish world. And for me, following the rules is tricky. I can't just live in a Jewish community and follow as many rules as I would like. I really have to be thinking all the time about when do I follow the rules, when do I break them. I am not a Talmudic scholar. I am not a biblical scholar. I'm the guy that, when they're reading the Torah, reads the little print at the bottom of the red book because I'm interested. And so when I was offered a chance to do some Torah study, I decided I'd geek out on following the rules and seeing what I could learn. I have one handout. If you're interested in my handout, it's on my website. So you can get this at any time, acole.net, and then you can go to Other Works by Adam, separated by little dashes, and then there's a Shavuot handout on the bottom. So you can check out all my sources, and you can tell me. If I misspeak, you're welcome to let me know. If I say somebody's name wrong or I get a fact wrong, you can let me know. We're going to break this up, and I'm going to try to go as quick as I can. We're first going to talk about the expression, we will do and we will hear. Then we're going to talk about the expression, strive with God. These are all biblical things that relate to us following rules. Then we're going to talk about the concept of building a fence and why we do it. Then we're going to discuss a hard question. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the Torah is not in heaven. And again, I'm going to try to go bang, bang, bang. But I do want to give you all a chance to talk to each other and to think and maybe talk back to me a little bit if I can. I want to start by asking you to please think about a time when you followed the rules or when you broke the rules, and when you either decided that you were glad you had followed them or sorry you had followed them, or you were glad you had broken them or you were sorry you had broken them. And I want you to find somebody next to you, and for 2 minutes, I want you to share a story, if you can, about a time you broke or followed the rules and what that was like for you. Go, 2 minutes. We're at about a minute, so if you haven't had a chance, switch. Okay, we're about 30 seconds left, so if you wrap it up. About 15 seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. A little trick I use with my kids when I teach elementary school. So raise your hand, please, if your story was about a time you followed the rules. Almost nobody. Oh, one person followed the rules. And were you glad you followed them, or were you sorry? And you were glad you followed them. Okay, raise your hand if you had a story about breaking the rules. Almost everyone. Okay, of you, how many were glad you broke the rules? Okay, about a third. How many were sorry you broke the rules? Nobody wants to admit it. Okay, cool. All right. So, as I said, Judaism is really about rules. We define ourselves in terms of which rules we will follow and how many. If you are Reformed, then there are far fewer rules you are interested in than if you are Orthodox. We started getting the Shavuot, this holiday is based on the passage from Exodus 24:7, in which we are all standing beneath Mount Sinai and we get the rules. And we respond as a people with a very interesting response. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. Now that's kind of strange. How many times has someone come up to you and said, somebody, maybe your boss, and they said, I want you to do this, you say, okay, I'll do it and I'll listen to you. No, you'd say, okay, I'm listening to you, I'm going to do it. So the fact that this is switched brings attention to it. This question of we will hear, it could be translated not hear, but listen. And that makes a little more sense. We will do and we will listen. Because listen could mean more than one thing. Hear is really kind of biological, but listen is more emotional. And so listen could be either I will listen to you, as in I will pay attention with my ears to you, or listen could be I will obey you. How many people think this idea of the Jews at Sinai, how many people think the Jews are saying, we will do this and we will listen to you, as in we will hear you? How many people think it's we will do this and we will obey you? That's more popular. Okay, the two, it's very different, because if one is saying we will do and we will listen, one is we will do because we want to do it. If we're just listening to you, we will do it and we will listen. We will do and then we will listen to what happens. We will pay attention. In a sense, listen can also be understand. We will do and then we will understand why we are doing. That's a very interesting, as opposed to we will do it and we will obey you. That's just we're going to do it because God said. We will do and we will understand. We will do, and by doing we will come to understand. Now, does it have to be one or the other? Maybe. It's something to think about. Be aware of that idea that by doing we come to understand. It's very interesting. I learned that Rashbam, a medieval commentator on the Torah, understood that when the Jews heard these rules, they understood that they were not going to be following only for now, but forever. Like, it wasn't just them who were following the rules. It was going to be all these generations after them, that they kind of understood that. So they were saying, whatever happens in our lives, whatever happens over the next, 50,000 generations, we're going to follow these rules. There is another relationship in which we make a vow and we agree that no matter what's going to happen, we're going to keep the vow. Does anybody know what that relationship is? Marriage, right, which I found very interesting. In a sense, this is a kind of a marriage. And in marriage, we, of course, divorces are possible, and so are people leaving the faith. But we make a commitment. It's not just blind faith to our marriage. We say, I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to go where you go. We're going to work this stuff out. So as you think about your relationship to the laws, think about it as a kind of a marriage and working it out. There's also another commentator who claims that the Jews were threatened at the bottom. Like the idea, because they were all at the bottom, the lowest point of Mount Sinai, God didn't just say, here are the rules. God said, if you don't follow the rules, I'm going to drop this mountain on you. And he said something very interesting. He said that if that's the case, then the Jews were compelled to follow those rules. And it's not legally binding. You don't have to do it. What an interesting idea. What if you could just say, hey, you know what? That's not a fair thing to do, God. I don't have to follow the rules at all. What would you do? Would you follow them? If a rabbi you believed was the authority told you didn't have to follow them anymore, what would you do? Would you still follow those rules? You don't have to answer. Just something to think about, So that's following the rules because we have to. That's the Jews being obedient. Now there's another thing which is called strive with God. The word Israel is sometimes translated as strive with God. I did not know this, but the word Israel is not a word per se. Israel is a conglomeration of words. The story in Genesis 32:28 in which Jacob wrestles with the angel. Are you all familiar with this story? Yeah, it's a very famous story. And in the end, the angel tells Jacob, you're not going to be Jacob anymore. You will be Israel because Sarita im Elohim. Sarita, so the Sa is the Yisra, and the Elohim is the El. Yisrael comes from Sarita im Elohim. It's pieces of those three words put together. Now, strive with God has two meanings. What's one of them, to strive with God? Well, one of the meanings is that God and I are going to strive together. I strive with God. We work together. We strive together. Whatever God wants, we're going to do it together. But there's another meaning for strive with God. What is that? Wrestle, right? Strive against. God, I don't believe that. I don't like that. I'm striving with God. Now, there's only one problem with my argument, which is what? It's in English, right? And who cares what strive means? It's a translation. So let's go to the original. I'm sure that if we go to the Hebrew, it'll be much clearer. Sarita, the root is sarah, and here are the translations of the root sarah. To dwell, to rest, to reside, to struggle, to contend, to defeat, to conquer, to rule, to prevail, to dominate, to have control over, to reign, regulate, control, strengthen, persist, persevere, free, release, loosen, send forth, act, make a prince, serve, minister, and wait on. No problem. Oh, it also could be sharita, not sarita. To soak, steep, immerse in water, dip, saturate, drench, dissolve, permit, allow, save, extricate. So this is open to interpretation, what sarita means. It could mean lots of things. It's very troublesome that the word Israel is not clear. But it puts a responsibility on us to think about, what do we mean when we say we strive with God? Okay, so building a fence. This is, again, it came out of Deuteronomy 4:2. You shall not add to the word that I command you, neither shall you subtract from it. What a setup. Boy, that's a problem, right? We know for a fact we cannot do everything. Some of the things we're asked to do have to do with the temple, and it's gone. We absolutely cannot follow every rule, not even if we wanted to. Where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with that? So, obviously the sages, in the 11th century and 12th century and even in the 1st and 2nd century knew that was a problem, and they wanted to make sure they followed as many laws as possible. So they took this passage, it's called a chumrah, offense. They took this passage, Deuteronomy 22:8, and it states that when one builds a house, if you have a fence, a roof on the house, you have to build a fence around the roof. Okay? That way, if somebody is on your roof, they won't fall off. And they said, okay, this clearly means that we need to build a fence around the law. Well, it's quite a jump. I kind of think the rabbis maybe wanted to build a fence around the law, and they found something in Deuteronomy to justify it. But, okay, so that's fine. So you build a fence around this roof. You build a fence around the law, okay? That way you have laws, and you add a little extra law around the law so that you don't accidentally transgress. Right? And one of the, famous ones we're all familiar with is like on Passover, what foods you can eat and you can't eat. And some people have added foods to this so that you don't accidentally eat the wrong food. Like, well, we're not going to eat corn and we're not going to eat rice either because, they kind of look like grain. And so this is problematical, right? What is the fence? Is the fence the law? Is the fence not the law? There's something missing from the concept of a fence that is important, I think. Why is the fence built around the roof? Is it to protect the roof? No, it's to protect a stranger who comes to your house and doesn't want to fall off. So there's a sense that's lost about this building a fence, which is that it's not there to protect the law. It's there to protect us from falling off the law. And that isn't just to prevent us from, breaking the law. God is God. If we break the law or don't break the law, God remains God. It's to prevent us from hurting ourselves with the law. That's essential. So the sages, I was surprised, but I found a book lots of resources, but one book in particular talking about the law. Here's one of the dangers of adding to the law. It begins with Adam and Eve. Eve is questioned by the serpent, and the serpent says, why aren't you eating that tree? Why don't you eat the fruit from that tree? And Eve says, well, we were told we're not supposed to eat or touch that tree. Okay, now the problem is God didn't say you can't touch the tree. God said you can't eat from the tree. But Eve says you can't eat or touch. And the serpent is very clever and uses that and say, well, did God actually say you can't touch the tree? And Eve's like, well, no. And so the serpent uses that addition, which is supposedly supposed to protect the tree from harm, uses that as a way in. And then Eve goes and says, well, if you didn't say you can't touch the tree, maybe you're not clear on whether you should eat. So from the very beginning, Genesis, first book, you can see that adding to the law can be problematical. There's a famous story about Gedaliah ben Achikam, who was so into the law that he didn't want to harm someone's reputation. So when he was told someone was going to assassinate him, he didn't believe it. He didn't want to believe anything bad about anyone because that was his interpretation of the law. And he got assassinated. He was killed. So these are real-life consequences of taking the law so much to heart that you add more than you should. And the sages were all over this. I found a book, and the book is in my handout. And the book is, I'm going to just tell you who wrote it, just in case you're curious here. It's by Hershey Friedman, The Risks and Dangers of Humorous, A Guide to the Sources. It took me about an hour to read. He talks about everything. The sages were constantly arguing about the law and whether you should add or subtract. So one of the things they came up with is that when to be lenient and when to be strict. And they said that, okay, if it's from the Torah, be strict. But if it's from the rabbis, you should be lenient. So if the rabbis came up with this stuff, if you're doing it because we said it, you err on the side of leniency. But if you're going to the Torah, then you need to be strict. And that helps some. There were other things as well. The sages talk about the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, and which one should you follow? Supposing you don't like Hillel because it's too lenient, should you follow Shammai? He's much more strict. And they say, well, here's what you can do. You can either follow Hillel or Shammai, but don't just take all the lenient stuff from Shammai and the lenient stuff from Hillel and do that. Don't just take all the strict stuff from Hillel and the strict stuff from Shammai. Pick one and do it. So even though Hillel is the one we follow, they were thinking about that. So I want to talk about, here's one hard question. And I want you to think about this, and maybe we can talk about it a little. I know I'm running out of time. We know that we aren't supposed to light a fire on Shabbat. Well, we build a fence around that, and we say you shouldn't put out a fire on Shabbat. Because if you put it out, you might be tempted to light it again. Now, this is a fence. I don't think there's anything in the Torah that says you can't put out a fire on Shabbat. But they built this fence around the law to protect us. So if there's an uncontrolled fire in your home, the law says you got to let it burn on Shabbat. All right? So the question is, would you do that? Now, that's if there's no danger to life. Please misunderstand. If there's danger to life, of course, that supersedes everything. But let's say you got a fire burning in your house and, you didn't start it, and you can get everybody out of there, but, you may not be able to save your house. Should you put that fire out? And why don't you take 1 minute to think and talk about that? What would you do? Seconds. Now, I wish we had a chance to really discuss this in a small setting, and I'm sorry we don't. But again, you're encouraged to continue these discussions outside of this. I want to talk a little bit about what Maimonides said. Maimonides said no, you can't put the fire out unless there's an obvious and immediate danger to life. He said you can block the fire with water. You can get big vessels of water and block it. He said you can even hint to your non-Jewish friends that they will not lose out if they fight the fire. You can't actually tell them you're going to pay them to put it out. You can't even ask them to put it out, but you can hint to them, if you put this out, you won't lose by it. Okay, but that's, not very helpful, but that's what he said. You can't put that fire out no matter what, even if it's going to burn your house down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why you might want to let that fire burn, and some of the reasons why you might not want to let that fire burn. And hopefully these will surprise you a little bit. First of all, think about it. Putting out that fire might endanger your life. You might be tempted to put out that runaway fire that could hurt you or kill you. This is a common thing in the law where, you think no big deal if I break this rule, but it takes you down a path that actually brings you into more jeopardy. So, okay, you can make this analogy. Okay, my house is burning. Is it burning enough that it's going to endanger me? Can I run in and get my favorite book? Yes. No. You're not qualified to make that decision. Stay out of your house. It's a fire. Don't run in and get something. But if the fire is small enough, and this is what we do in life all the time, we have to make this decision. Is there a danger, if I break this rule? We have the law to just tell us, don't risk it. The law has been around for 2,000 years, 3,000 years. Just trust the law and stay out. There's a reason to follow the law because there's wisdom in it, and you might gain from following that wisdom. But what if it's something much smaller? What if it's just what if you had company over at your house and you were showing them your ketubah, and your ketubah catches on fire, your marriage certificate, and you throw it in the sink. Are you going to put that out? It's beautiful. It's unique. It's going to hurt to lose that ketubah. But if you put it, and of course, if you put it out, who's gonna, there's no harm in that, right? Who's gonna die? No one. Should you let it burn? Well, let me posit this to you, that there is suffering in life, no matter whether you follow the laws or don't follow the laws. And choosing your suffering is a powerful thing to do. Letting that ketubah burn would hurt, but then you got to put it in perspective, right? Okay, so am I the kind of person that's going to break the law all the time? If I put this ketubah out, what's next? Oh, I put that ketubah out, maybe I can put... Then you're no longer in control, then you're just going to your impulses, So maybe you should go ahead and let things be, let things go, because maybe the next time it'll be the house that's burning down and you'll think about, you put your ketubah out and that was fine, you can put your house out. Again, it may lead you down a path that you don't want. There is something in a certain kind of deliberate suffering that is worthwhile because suffering is inevitable. And when we choose our suffering, it helps us better discern when to break those rules and when not to. When is it really important to break the rule? And when are you just breaking it because your show is on and you want to watch your show? It's amazingly difficult to do. All right, so there's why you might not want to put out the fire. Here's why you might want to put out the fire. Living conditions are not the same as when those laws were made. When Maimonides was making those rules, he was living in Egypt, I believe, in stone houses, and they didn't really burn down. The stuff inside them burned, but the house was still there. There was mostly just going to be a bunch of soot. It wasn't going to be a danger. No other houses were going to catch on fire. It was just going to be a fire in your home. He had no idea that in 500 years, people would be living in wood houses all stuck together, and if a fire catches your house on, it could burn your entire town down. He didn't account for that. You have a right to account for that. You can't just say, I'm going to do what Maimonides did, because you're not living in his time. If he was living in 1500 in the Netherlands, he would have come up with different rules or different ways to do it. Not putting out that fire goes beyond you. It may endanger your entire town. And this could not only kill people, but even more, it might have an effect of making Jewish people scapegoats. The Jews didn't put out that fire. All they had to do was put out that stupid fire, and then our entire town wouldn't have gone. So not only are people dead, then, this happened in the pandemic when, certain people chose not to take precautions, and the Jews were scapegoated for that. So these are very real situations we have to take into consideration. So you might want to put out that fire. If this troubles you, that there's no easy answer to this, that I didn't come up here and tell you when to follow the rules and when not to, I want to share one last story, and it's called The Torah is Not in Heaven. How many of you are familiar with this Oven of Aknai, Torah is Not in Heaven story? Just a few of you. This is an amazing story. I love this story. So around 1st or 2nd century, Rabbi Eliezer is having an argument with a bunch of other rabbis. They bring this oven in, and they're trying to decide whether this oven is ritually pure, right? And Eliezer says that the oven is pure. And the other rabbis are saying, no, it's not. And they argue, and they argue. And Eliezer says, look, he's tired of arguing with them. He says, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree is going to prove it. And the carob tree gets up and moves away. The rabbis say, no, the carob tree has nothing to do with this. So Eliezer says, well, look, if my argument's correct, then the stream will prove it. And the stream changes direction. And the rabbis say, the stream has nothing to do with this. Finally, Rabbi Eliezer says, well, the walls of this place will prove it. The walls start to crumble in because Eliezer's right. And then one of the rabbis scolds the walls and says, this has nothing to do with you. So the walls, they halfway stop. They stop crumbling, but they don't go back. Out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer, they don't go back where they were. They kind of stay like that. Rabbi Eliezer's had it. He said, look, if I'm right, heaven will prove it. And a voice from heaven comes down and says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's right. And the rabbis say, the Torah is not in heaven. And apparently God responds to this privately by laughing and saying, my children have defeated me. So God's very pleased. The point of this, by the way, this story goes on and on. It's much more interesting than this, and I encourage you to look. There's a whole second section. But the point being, the Torah is not in heaven. This debate was to establish that we're not a mystical religion. We're not a mystical sect. Decisions in Judaism are not made by, mystical, no matter how convincing they are. They're made by arguments and discussions. So you have to get in there and strive with God. You are expected to. And the answers may change over time. So not only, should we not expect the rules to be laid out for us, we're not allowed to do that. You have to make decisions about the rules. I have to make a decision about what rules I'm going to follow in my life, and I have to ask other people what they do and get into it and really think about it. So be thoughtful in your approach to the rules, and don't let anybody make those decisions for you. Again, my handout with all my sources is online on my website at acol.net, and if you need to contact me to find out how you can find that, I'd be happy. Thank you for your attention. I really enjoyed it.